Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of my semi-successful attempt to pick a favorite movie for each year. Part 1 covered movies from 1920 to 1965. In this video, I'll bring us up to 2019. We'll have to skip 2020 for now, since I technically haven't yet seen a single movie that came out this year. I suppose you could make an argument that I have, but this whole project turned out to be much bigger than I expected. It's been a time-consuming and overwhelming task, pouring through thousands of titles and trying to pare my list down to the ones I enjoyed the most. As I explained in part 1, the point of this exercise is not to name the best movie from each year, or the most popular movie. And there are also plenty of films I like that aren't on the list. I can't name every good movie, that would be ridiculous. This is my personal and subjective list of films that are extra special to me. Of course, because I'm so stinking indecisive, I couldn't always settle on just one favorite for each year, and there are some movies included that maybe aren't actually favorites, but I couldn't bear to leave them out, and those are the honorable mentions. For those of you who maybe got the wrong idea about what that means in part 1, an honorable mention is a good thing. Now, I do want to let you know going into this, part 1 was a challenge because there were so many movies I'd seen, and it was hard to narrow it down for each year, especially in the late 30s and the 40s. There were just so many possibilities. Part 2 was equally hard, but for the opposite reason. It is hopefully not a big surprise to you that I have a stronger preference for pre-60s movies than for films from the late 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So there were some years where I had to say, okay, this is the pitifully small handful of movies I have to choose from that I've seen from this year. Which one did I like the best? I've got a few titles on here that probably wouldn't make the cut if this were just a list of my favorite films. But the goal is to pick a favorite movie for each year, so we're gonna roll with it. Okay, let's begin. Unfortunately, 1966 is not a cut-and-dry year for me, so we're off to a great start. It's down to 3 movies. 2 comedies, How to Steal a Million and The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming, and a spaghetti western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which was a pleasant surprise that helped change my mind about westerns. I've only seen each of these films once, though, and I'd have to see them again to know which one I prefer. 1967 is easier. Some important movies came out in 67, but the favorite of the year for me is Wait Until Dark, a thriller directed by Terrence Young that stars Audrey Hepburn as a recently blinded woman who unwittingly gets tangled up in a drug deal when 3 men, played by Richard Crenna, Jack Weston, and Alan Arkin in one of his best, creepiest performances, show up at her apartment. It's a great movie with an intense final sequence. Honorable mentions number 1 and 2 are teacher movies, Up the Down Staircase starring Sandy Dennis, and To Sir with Love starring Sidney Poitier. Honorable mention number 3, The Dirty Dozen, the World War II movie where Lee Marvin leads a group of convicted murderers on a mission to kill a bunch of Nazis. For 1968, we're back to Indecision. Yay! Night of the Living Dead, believe it or not, is probably the movie I've seen the most from that year. I had trouble sleeping after watching it the first time. There were a few different images that kept flashing through my mind, but other possibilities include Where Eagles Dare, the World War II movie where Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood team up to kill a bunch of Nazis. War movies in the 60s were great fun. Funny Girl, the musical biopic about Fanny Brice, which has some great songs, including Don't Rain on My Parade, and The Thomas Crown Affair, a film starring Steve McQueen as a wealthy bank executive who coolly pulls off a heist, but has to evade Faye Dunaway's attempts to pin the crime on him. Lots of style in that one. So 1968, like 1966, is kind of a to-be-determined year, and so is 1969. The possibilities from this year are ones that I liked well enough, but I didn't necessarily love, including True Grit, Topaz, and Doppelganger, also known as Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. So I'll take a rain check on this one. 1970, thank goodness, is easy. The Out-of-Towners, in which Jack Lemmon and Sandy Dennis play a couple who are trying to go to New York City for a job interview, but everything goes horribly wrong. It's a hilarious, very quotable movie, and a longtime family favorite. For 1971, I'm picking another family favorite, though I'm sure I haven't seen it as many times as my siblings have, Fiddler on the Roof, the Norman Jewison-directed film adaptation of the stage musical. Topol stars as Tevye, a Jewish farmer with 5 daughters to marry off, whose devotion to tradition is challenged when they start choosing their own husbands, all on the eve of the Russian Revolution. 1972 is a tie. There's 1776, the adaptation of the stage musical about the writing of the Declaration of Independence, starring William Daniels as John Adams. It's got some quirky editing reflective of the time it was made, but I love it anyway in all its nerdy historical glory. The other winner for 1972 is What's Up, Doc, which I reviewed not too long ago. Peter Bogdanovich's tribute to screwball comedies of olden days, starring Ryan O'Neal and Barbra Streisand, is one of my favorite zany comedies ever. But coming in a very close third is The Poseidon Adventure, the Irwin Allen production, not the first big disaster movie, but one of the best, about a group of survivors on a cruise ship that's been struck by a tidal wave and turned upside down. For 1973, I'm going to go with Soylent Green. Richard Fleischer directed and Charlton Heston starred in this futuristic dystopian mystery thriller with a famous twist, but it's Edward G. Robinson's memorable and moving final performance that gives this movie the edge for me. Honorable mention, The Sting, which has an awesome soundtrack full of Scott Joplin music that I've probably loved since I was about 5 years old. 1974, my favorite is The Taking of Pelham 123. Directed by Joseph Sargent, it's a heist film. I'm surprised how many heist movies are on my list, since I don't consider that one of my special interests. 4 men hijack a New York subway train car and demand a ransom, and Walter Matthau, working for the transit police, has to figure out who they are and how to stop them. It's an awesome movie from beginning to end, and I love the main theme. For 1975, I'm going with the first summer blockbuster, Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg, in which a great white shark is terrorizing local beachgoers, so 3 men, Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw, go out to catch it. It's a movie that's got everything: scares, humor, adventure, tension, character building, all backed by John Williams music. It's also a rare occasion where, I've got to say, the movie, in my opinion, was much better than the book. Costume change! I had to film this in sections. I'm not sure what to say for 1976. My nostalgic side wants to go with Family Plot. It's Hitchcock's final film and one of his weaker entries, but as a kid, I liked how silly it was. The other option is The Town That Dreaded Sundown, loosely based on a true story about a masked serial killer on the loose in Texas. Told in a sort of docudrama style, it's a disturbing film thanks to its serious way of handling its content and its unsettling ending. For 1977, my pick is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, another Spielberg film starring Richard Dreyfuss as a witness of UFO activity who, with other witnesses, is compelled to keep watching the sky for more. It's not your typical Alien movie in terms of pacing and action. There's something a little, operatic or poetic about it. Of the films I've seen from 1978, which is not many, nothing stands out as a particular favorite, so I'm gonna hold off on that one for now, because it's my list, and I can do that. My pick for 1979, I think, has to be Dracula, the John Badham-directed film that stars Frank Langella as the Count. Originally, the gorgeous music was all I cared about, my favorite John Williams score, but the more I watched the movie, which for a time was what I had to do to hear the soundtrack, the more I came to enjoy the whole movie on its own merit. Honorable mention, Ridley Scott's Alien, one of the scariest space movies ever. 1980. I'm surprised I'm doing this, since this is not a fandom I consider myself a member of, but I think I'm going to give it to The Empire Strikes Back. Although in certain respects I liked Return of the Jedi better, I agree with the general consensus that all around, Empire is the superior Star Wars movie. For 1981, I'm stuck again. The one that gets the warmest response from me is actually The Fox and the Hound, but I haven't been including cartoon animation, so it seems weird to start now, especially since The Fox and the Hound isn't even one of my favorite Disney movies, although there is one scene that makes me bawl my eyes out. To make up for the blank, I've got 3 picks for 1982. Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, directed by Nicholas Meyer, which I can testify you don't have to be a hardcore Star Trek fan to love. Great movie with exciting action, a compelling story, thrilling James Horner music, and wonderful performances from the original cast and Ricardo Montalban. E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which is probably my second favorite Steven Spielberg film. Such a sweet, touching movie with great performances from the young actors and a John Williams score that makes the finale even more emotional. And I'm throwing in The Scarlet Pimpernel, a longtime family favorite, well, a favorite with the ladies of the house, with Anthony Andrews, Jane Seymour, and Ian McKellen. I wasn't going to include it because it's a TV movie, but oh well. Since I've made one exception already, for 1983, I guess I'm free to go with The Scarlet and the Black, which is kind of a Scarlet Pimpernel story itself set in a different time and place. It's a TV movie set in the Vatican during World War II, in which Gregory Peck stars as a priest doing everything he can to move Allied servicemen to safety while the Germans try to catch him in the act. I enjoyed the true story and the performances from Peck and Christopher Plummer as the shrewd Gestapo colonel who suspects him. For 1984, I'm going with The Never-Ending Story. I read the book when I was a kid, and I remember thinking, how could they possibly have made a movie of this? Years later, I finally saw the film, and I realized, oh, that's how. So many things about it are just right. Granted, it neglects the entire latter section of the book, but I didn't like that part as much anyway, so I was okay with it. By the way, in case you're wondering, yes, I also cried during the Artax scene. The 80s were big for fantasy films, and for 1985, I'm going to talk about 2 of them. Return to Oz I saw a lot with my sister growing up. It's a sequel to The Wizard of Oz, but much darker and more twisted, with lots of creepy moments to terrify a small child. But it was also fun and heartwarming, with many quotable lines. More recently, as in March, I saw Ladyhawke, another fantasy that deserves to be a contender. It's more a fantasy for grown-ups with adult characters and a focus on romance, and the romance was what I loved about it. Michelle Pfeiffer and Rutger Hauer as cursed lovers, she a hawk by day, he a wolf by night, traveling together with little hope of ever being able to see each other again. There was something really beautiful about the movie. For 1986, I kinda want to say Aliens, the sequel to Alien, which was directed by James Cameron and is an awesome movie. The effects, the characters, great stuff. I confess, though, that it feels slightly dishonest because I did look away or cover my eyes for a lot of the shots where the xenomorphs are on screen, and they're on screen a lot. I absolutely agree that it's more of an action movie than the first one was, but I disagree about it not being a scary movie. I was scared. The alternative, a movie that I was actually able to look at 100% of the time, is Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, which I used to call the one with the whales, and is definitely the most fun Star Trek movie, thanks largely to the fish out of water time travel stuff. Honorable mention, Little Shop of Horrors, the excellent film adaptation of the Menken and Ashman stage musical, directed by Frank Oz and starring Rick Moranis and Ellen Greene. I wasn't going to include it because I have made some efforts to control my list, but then I rewatched some scenes and nope, gotta mention it. And costume change number 3... My pick for 1987 is probably The Princess Bride, which is a delightful cornucopia of adventure and romance and comedy and action. I was late to the party with this swashbuckler, though, and I know my appreciation for it is leagues behind that of its very dedicated fans. Honorable mention, Moonstruck, a romance that works amazingly well, with a wonderful cast led by Cher playing a widow who accidentally falls for her new fiancé's moody brother, played by Nicolas Cage. I went through several lists of films from 1988 trying to pick something. Unfortunately, most of the movies I've seen from that year I've only seen part of, so they can't count. The most viable option is The Land Before Time, and I really don't consider that a favorite, so I'll pass on this year for now. For 1989, I guess I'll go with Steel Magnolias, which features a who's who cast of women and a few men. It's an emotional roller coaster that has the uncanny ability to make you sob 1 second, burst out laughing the next, then go back to crying, then go back to laughing. That sounds exhausting, but I always found it enjoyable. My favorite from 1990 is Home Alone, the Christmas classic directed by Chris Columbus, starring Macaulay Culkin as Kevin McAllister, the kid who gets left behind when his family goes on vacation. When I was little, I was all about the slapstick, plus I liked the idea of having the whole house to yourself for once. As an adult, I still love those things, but I've also really come to appreciate the lessons Kevin learns, and the final scene chokes me up every time. 1991, I'm going with Terminator 2 Judgment Day, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton, even though I don't think I saw the very beginning, and I didn't see the first one. It's so good that it stands on its own. Directed by James Cameron, the award-winning visual effects are some of the best ever, still are, and what pushes it into superlative territory overall is the compelling story, with its surprisingly moving themes of trust and humanity. For 1992, I'm going with Of Mice and Men. While the '39 adaptation of the John Steinbeck novel with Burgess Meredith and Lon Chaney Jr. is a great film, I'm more familiar with this version, directed by Gary Sinise and starring Sinise and John Malkovich. It's a rough story in a lot of ways, but it's an excellent film. Honorable mention, Sister Act, which has a few scenes I like to revisit every once in a while when I need a pick-me-up. My pick for 1993, without question, is Jurassic Park, my favorite Spielberg movie, even though I was afraid of the dinosaurs when I was little. It's one of life's fun ironies. A cautionary tale based on Michael Crichton's novel about lab-created dinos running amok during the trial run of a dino theme park. It's got an awesome cast and an awesome score and awesome writing, and it's an ideal marriage of practical and digital effects, with visuals that still hold up today. For 1994, there are a couple movies I could choose from, but I think I'm going to throw a curveball and use this opportunity to bring up a little-known film called Renaissance Man, in which Danny DeVito stars as a guy who, out of desperation, takes a job teaching English classes to Army recruits who are about to fail basic training. I really enjoyed this one as a kid, and I guess it shows how much of a nerd I am that every time the term oxymoron came up in school, I always thought of the class discussion about it in this movie. 1995 is a tie between two movies that have wildly different moods. My ties usually are. Outbreak is an intense and stressful film about the rampant spread of an Ebola-like hemorrhagic fever, starring Dustin Hoffman alongside a dozen other familiar faces. It's my personal favorite pandemic movie. While You Were Sleeping is another family favorite and a Christmas favorite, a romantic comedy starring Sandra Bullock and Bill Pullman that I love even if it does involve a big misunderstanding which could easily have been avoided, and normally I hate those. But I love this movie, especially its quirky dialogue and its oddball characters. 1996, Independence Day, the Roland Emmerich-directed alien invasion summer blockbuster starring Will Smith, Jeff Goldblum, and Bill Pullman, is the easy winner for this year. I've seen it countless times since I was little and love it just as much now as I did then. I still look away during the autopsy scene, though. I'm not sure what to say about 1997. I like both Volcano movies that came out that year. Volcano with Tommy Lee Jones and Anne Heche, and Dante's Peak with Pierce Brosnan and Linda Hamilton, which is one of my mom's favorites, but is it my favorite? I've actually had to ask myself that question repeatedly while making this list. Other contenders are The Fifth Element, which I thought was a lot of fun the one time I saw it 15 years ago. No idea how I'd feel about it now. And The Beautician and the Beast, a cute rom-com starring Fran Drescher that's like a combination of The Nanny and a PG-13 Hallmark movie where she's hired to be the governess for the motherless children of an Eastern European dictator, played with autocratic flair by Timothy Dalton. So, my pick would probably be one of those. 1998 is another tie. One pick is The Truman Show, a fascinating comedy drama directed by Peter Weir and starring Jim Carrey as Truman Burbank, an ordinary man living from day to day, completely unaware that he's the subject of a popular TV series all about his life. This one really bent my mind when I first saw it as a kid. My other pick, for contrast, is You've Got Mail, the romantic comedy of the AOL era and a remake of the 1940 Ernst Lubitsch film, The Shop Around the Corner, in which Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan star as rival bookstore owners who don't know they've been chatting with each other online. I prefer this one over the older film and the other remake in the good old summertime, maybe because of the bookstore setting. For 1999, I'm going with October Sky, about former NASA engineer Homer Hickham's teenage struggle as an aspiring rocket scientist in a small coal mining town in the 50s, based on his book Rocket Boys. It's a very good film with great supporting performances from Chris Cooper and Laura Dern. It's also the movie that launched my lifelong crush on Jake Gyllenhaal, who, unlike many of my other favorite actors, is still alive. He's only 17 here, which is... but it's okay, I was 12 when I saw it. My pick for 2000 is a movie I saw last year, Frequency, in which Jim Caviezel plays a detective who gets in touch with his dead father, a firefighter played by Dennis Quaid, in the past through a time anomaly and an old radio set. It's a film that manages to combine crime drama with sci-fi fantasy, not an easy thing to pull off, but it's the scenes of the son getting the seemingly impossible and inexplicable chance to connect with his dad that made me love the film. For 2001, I guess I'll go with the romantic comedy Kate and Leopold, another film that messes with time. Hugh Jackman in the past accidentally follows a time traveler through a portal and wakes in the present day where he eventually falls in love with Meg Ryan. Admittedly, it's a pretty fluffy movie, and there's even a deleted scene that acknowledges the time travel plot hole, but I've enjoyed watching it many times with my mom, so it makes the list. For 2002, my first pick is The Pianist, the Roman Polanski-directed biopic starring Adrian Brody as Vladislav Spielman, a Jewish pianist struggling to survive with his family in Nazi-occupied Poland. I've always loved this film, which is both grim and heartbreaking, and beautiful and inspiring. It's one of my favorite World War II movies, and I recommend reading Spielman's book as well. My second pick, though, for 2002 is Signs, my favorite M. Night Shyamalan film, which stars Mel Gibson as an ex-priest and widower who's trying to get his family through an alien invasion. I like the small scale, and I like its quirkiness. The characters and dialogue are often so bizarre, which we came to realize later was a Shyamalan characteristic. And guess what? These aliens scared me too! Why do I have so many movies on this list that terrified me the first time I saw them? My pick for 2003 is Pirates of the Caribbean: The Curse of the Black Pearl. This movie has the unique distinction of being the only film I've ever seen at my uncle's house. It was a totally unusual and unplanned activity, and it was an exhilarating experience. The sequels may have faltered in certain ways, but this first entry, introducing Johnny Depp's iconic role as Captain Jack Sparrow, was pretty close to perfect. Honorable mention, also a pirate movie, Peter Pan, for Jason Isaacs' incredibly fun dual performance as Mr. Darling and Captain Hook. For 2004, well, if this were the mid-2000s, I would say, without a doubt in my mind, The Phantom of the Opera, but I don't feel inclined to say that anymore. I could say The Village, which I do like and have watched multiple times, but it was a strange film and a disappointing follow-up from M. Night Shyamalan, Or I could say National Treasure, the fun caper in which Nicolas Cage steals the Declaration of Independence. That's probably the safest option. I don't get super excited about it, but my enjoyment of it has fewer strings attached, unlike the other two movies. My pick for 2005 is Red Eye, a quick-paced thriller from Wes Craven, the bulk of which is set on a plane, in which Rachel McAdams' innocent meet-cute with Cillian Murphy turns into a nightmarish hostage situation. She's a very sympathetic protagonist, and he's Cillian Murphy. His character is an alarming blend of sexiness and creepiness. It's a little bit confusing. For 2006, my choice is Pan's Labyrinth, or if, like me, you prefer the original Spanish title, El Laberinto del Fauno, an intensely imaginative period piece directed by Guillermo del Toro. It's about a young girl whose means of escaping the upheaval of her home life comes in the guise of a faun who tells her she's a lost princess who must complete 3 impossible tasks to reclaim her royalty. What is real and what is not become so intertwined that it leaves you thinking past the end credits, and the visuals, which are sometimes beautiful, sometimes grotesque, are never forgettable. I'm on the fence about 2007. While I thought No Country for Old Men was a great, disturbing film, I'm not sure that I enjoyed it enough to consider it a favorite. And while I got a huge kick out of Enchanted's good-natured, self-deprecating, or self-referential humor, I'm not sure if that's a favorite either. And talk about 2 completely different movies, wow! For 2008, I'm going with Nim's Island, an adventure film in which Abigail Breslin is left to defend her island home when her dad goes on a boating trip and doesn't come back on schedule. It's a kids' movie, and both times I watched it I felt very aware of that fact, but it's got a few elements I love. Gerard Butler plays dual roles as her scientist father and as her favorite literary character, a roguish adventurer. And Jodie Foster plays the agoraphobic, germophobic writer, not adventurous at all, who created that character and frequently has arguments with him, especially after Abigail Breslin emails her asking for her help. This is the stuff in the movie that I love. For 2009, I don't know if I should go with Up, the Disney Pixar movie famous for its ridiculously emotional beginning, or The Young Victoria, the biopic starring Emily Blunt as Queen Victoria at the beginning of her reign, which is a movie that I really like, but again, I'm not sure if it's a favorite. So, 2010, my pick is The King's Speech, directed by Tom Hooper, who is now unfortunately associated with badly adapting musicals for the screen. It's a biopic of King George VI, set just before his ascension to the throne on the eve of World War II. Colin Firth does an excellent job playing my favorite royal, who's struggling to master his stammer by working with a speech therapist, played by Geoffrey Rush. It's a great movie. Honorable mention, Inception, which was the most popular movie of the year. The visuals were spectacular, yes, but the movie itself left me feeling kind of cold until the climactic scene with Cillian Murphy. That alone sold the movie for me. I had to think about 2011 for a while, but I finally settled on Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the first film in last decade's successful Planet of the Apes prequel trilogy. I did have my doubts beforehand, but I thought it was a great movie. It gave nods to the original '68 film, but not so many that it became ridiculous, and it was an intense and emotional kickoff to what turned out to be a solid trilogy focusing on Caesar, the chimpanzee leader played by Andy Serkis, through the movie magic of motion capture technology. For 2012, I'll go with Robot and Frank, a film that stars Frank Langella as an aging cat burglar whose children, alarmed by his memory loss and worried about his well-being, insist that he live with an AI assistant. Langella is playing a wily character and clearly enjoying it, and I loved the interactions between him and the robot, voiced by Peter Sarsgaard. Also, this wouldn't be a legitimate list for me if it didn't have some movie about a rebellious senior citizen who refuses to be put away. 2013 had several great movies that demanded intense performances. Prisoners, in particular, was a heavy, grueling film about a kidnapping that spotlighted Jake Gyllenhaal, Hugh Jackman, and Paul Dano. But if I'm naming movies that struck me on a deeper level, I think my choice is The Railway Man, a film starring Colin Firth with solid supporting performances from Nicole Kidman, Jeremy Irvine, and Hiroyuki Sanada. It tells the true story of Eric Lomax, a man struggling to recover from his experiences as a World War II POW. Lomax's story has certain elements in common with that of Louis Zamperini, including sharing the powerful theme of forgiveness. The next 3 years are kind of a mess. For whatever reason, maybe I was tired at this point, my inability to make a decision took over. 2014 had its share of memorable movies. Whiplash was insane, as was Nightcrawler. Gravity was impressive, even if it made you sick. Still Alice with Julianne Moore as a woman with early onset Alzheimer's was incredibly emotional. What We Do in the Shadows, Taika Waititi's spoof documentary about 4 vampires sharing a house in New Zealand, was hilarious. And while Interstellar may have been an extremely divisive film for Christopher Nolan fans, of the Nolan movies I've seen, I liked it the most. 2015, I'm in a similar position. A lot of people thought Bridge of Spies was dull Oscar bait, but I liked it and thought Mark Rylance was great. Far From the Madding Crowd was very appealing. Woman in Gold, Eye in the Sky, and Maggie all told compelling stories. Everest, about the 96 climbing disaster, didn't disappoint me. And I think everyone agrees that The Martian, where Matt Damon is presumed dead and left behind on Mars, is a great film. Same thing with 2016. Hidden Figures, also a NASA movie, was excellent, as was Hacksaw Ridge. I enjoyed La La Land and Train to Busan a lot. 10 Cloverfield Lane was great except for the last 10 or 15 minutes. And nobody talks about Anthropoid, but I thought it was really good. And even Pride and Prejudice and Zombies grew on me the second time around. Some of these movies I might even describe as I really liked it, but... or I loved it except for this thing, and that keeps me from committing. But also, I've only seen most of these movies once. There are several of them that I've wanted to watch again, but I haven't done it. Maybe if I did, if I stopped hunting down new movies to watch and instead took a little extra time to revisit some I'd seen before, like I used to do, maybe I'd be able to figure out which ones I have a special preference for. The majority of the movies on my list that I know without a doubt are favorites are ones I've seen multiple times. I think that makes a difference. Fortunately, I'm back on track for 2017. My favorite was Thor Ragnarok. Yes, I've got a Marvel comic book movie on this list, directed by Taika Waititi, who also plays a supporting role. It's a wild departure from the previous 2 Thor movies, but because the actors who carried over were so good at embracing the change, it works amazingly well. The movie practically explodes with energy and humor and charisma. 2018, I saw a lot of movies that I didn't think much of, but 2 exceptions stand out. One is A Quiet Place, the sci-fi drama starring John Krasinski, who also directed, and Emily Blunt as a couple trying to survive with their children after the world's been overrun with aliens who have exceptionally good hearing. Yes, it's another alien invasion movie, I can't believe this. The other is Arctic, a survival film directed by Joe Penna that stars Mads Mikkelsen, who easily carries pretty much the entire movie by himself as a man who's been stranded in the Arctic after a plane crash. He's eking out an existence and still hoping for a rescue when something happens that requires him to make a perilous journey. I loved it. Finally, we reached the last one, because remember, I'm not doing 2020. There are still a lot of movies that came out toward the end of 2019 that I haven't yet gotten a chance to see. But of the 8 movies that I have seen, I'll give an honorable mention to Godzilla King of the Monsters, which happily exceeded my expectations, but I think my favorite is one I saw just a couple months ago when it got its wide release on Amazon Prime, The Vast of Night. It's a low-budget science fiction film set in the late 1950s about a DJ and a switchboard operator who try to figure out the source of some strange interference in the radio. I loved just about everything about this movie. The atmosphere, the tension, the characters, the dialogue. It's a simple plot, but it's effectively executed, and I loved the bold but judicious choices they made. I really look forward to watching it again. Alright, that concludes this experiment, this personal journey through a century of films. Thanks for coming along and listening to me enthuse about my favorite movies. As I said in part 1, my list has a lot of flexibility to it, and it's possible that in 10 years or so, it could look a little different. I don't know. We'll have to see then. And of course, doing this project has reminded me of all the movies I'd still like to see, and brought ones I'd never heard of to my attention. Add them all to the list! If you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on these movies, I have reviewed quite a few of them already, and I've put together a playlist of these videos for your convenience, and you can find a link to that playlist pinned in the comments below. And any favorite movies that I haven't reviewed yet are fair game for the future. I'm also going to try to make a public document for those of you who'd like a written version of this list to look at. I have just given you well over 100 movie recommendations, and that's a little overwhelming, so a list might be handy. If it works, you'll be able to find that link in the playlist description. If the link doesn't show up there, it didn't work. Okay, thanks for tuning in to this lengthy video. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of my list? What would you put on your list for movies from 1966 to 2019? Or 2020 if you've actually seen movies from this year. I look forward to reading your responses, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching!